In this episode, we're going to talk about cultures and organizations, and really all about this book here by Geert Hofstede and his son Geert Jan Hofstede and Michael Minkoff. I hope I've done those names justice. If I haven't, I apologize. In this book, Geert Hofstede sets out 6 cultural dimensions, and pretty much every major country in the world has gone through some type of research where they've been able to pick out these dimensions. Now, the book is a 400 plus page, sort of almost university level textbook. The research in there is very in depth. If you want to get more information on this, check out the book. Also, I'll put a link below the video to Geert Hofstede's company's website where you can actually compare different countries. I want to start this video by saying I am not making racial or country stereotypes. Everything that I am discussing is directly pulled from either the book or the websites. A lot of countries and a lot of places around the world have stereotypes, and stereotypes come from our cultural norms. And these cultural norms turn into stereotypes. So when I'm referencing these, I am not stereotyping these countries. I'm referring to their culture. So I'm going to try to be as baseline and unemotional about people's different cultures, but I am going to maybe interject my own opinions from time to time from my own worldview, and also maybe current political events or current world events. As a reference, a lot of this research was done in regards of the working environment. So while these norms might not be true for how people act outside of work, there is a certain amount of truth when it comes to how these norms will play out within the work environment. For instance, because somebody is from an individualistic country with a low power distance, which is America, very highly individualistic, and a low power distance, which means they are less into hierarchical structures, you will find that it's okay to disagree with your boss. Now, if you work in Great Britain, Canada, or United Kingdom, you will know that the egalitarian way of discussing ideas is very appropriate. However, with somewhere like China, Saudi Arabia, and India, if you can check out these scores on the Hofstede website as well. These are countries where speaking out like that to your boss within a work environment is actually frowned upon because they have high power distance with low individualism. They're a collective society. They have a high power distance. So disagreeing with a boss's presentation or disagreeing with somebody to their face in front of others is culturally wrong. Most major countries I could pick on to go through these dimensions. The 2 that I'm going to use in this video are the United States and China. The reason why I'm using those 2 is because they're 2 super big powers in the world right now. And out of all the Anglo-Saxon sort of countries, the United States is the most. And out of the Asian countries, China is very similar to a lot of other Asian countries, but again, probably the most, where you might see some differences in Japan and South Korea. This is a trying to understand the 6 dimensions, which I'm going to bring up on the screen right now. And everything that I talk about, I will be referring to the 6 dimensions, just a general overview of what the dimensions are. And then I will be referring to the United States and China. They have, out of the 6 dimensions, they have 4 that are completely different from each other, and then they have 2 that are quite similar. And I'm going to discuss those so you get an idea of what I'm talking about with the 6 dimensions. Anyway, on the screen now, I'm going to bring up the 6 dimensions, and I'm just going to quickly talk about them while they're on the screen. The 6 dimensions are power distance, individualism, masculinity, uncertainty avoidance, long-term orientation, and indulgence. Power distance is really about authority. Authoritarian countries are going to be high in power distance. More egalitarian countries are going to be low on power distance. Individualism, pretty straightforward. More individualistic countries are going to be high on that. Less individual countries, more collective countries will be low on that. Masculinity versus femininity. That's basically the scale on that one. There's more masculine countries, there's more feminine countries. Uncertainty avoidance, there are certain countries that can work in ambiguity. There are certain countries that can't work in ambiguity. For instance, Germany would be a country that does not work well in ambiguity because they want everything to be very processed. That's a German stereotype. Long-term orientation. Some countries' culture are about the long-term and long-term relationships. Other countries' culture is about short-term, now, context of the moment. And then finally, indulgent. Some countries are about instant gratification, about indulgence, about showing off wealth, about power, success. Other countries are more reserved and their indulgent levels are lower because they go against social norms. That was a brief overview of the cultural dimensions. Now I'm going to bring up on the screen a bar chart that shows China's and United States score, and I'm going to quickly talk about those 6 areas again, but referring to those 2 countries and just giving you a little bit of a deeper understanding of what each of those 6 dimensions mean. So here is the bar chart for China and United States. On the screen there, at first glance, you'll see that power distance is very high in China and a little bit lower or below midway line in the United States. Individualism, super high in the United States, and low in China. China's a lot more collective. Masculinity, very similar. We've got uncertainty avoidance. They're both kind of in the same place. They both work with an ambiguity. China a little bit more than the United States. And the next one there is long-term orientation. And you see that China's way higher on long-term orientation than America is on their long-term orientation. However, if you look back at the individualism and then you look at long-term orientation, you might get the idea that America is more into instant rewards and instant individual freedoms. And then you go to indulgence. Again, China very low on indulgence and America quite high, feeding into that individualism, that short-term gratification that possibly the American culture has. But we'll discuss that a bit further. Okay, so I'm gonna leave the bar chart up in the corner here as I'm talking through them, but I'm also going to use my notes here as I go through the 6 areas now for both countries, and I'm going to talk about both of them at the same time. Now, looking at the first one, which is power distance, the score here, which I've got on my screen here, we've got power distance of 40 for United States, which is quite low. We've got in the 80s for China. Basically, what that means is China is a very hierarchical country. There is the haves and have-nots, but that's expected in society. People in China understand that power comes with position and wealth. Where in America, you might argue, I know you've got the Jeff Bezos and you got the Zuckerbergs, you got all the billionaires, and there is a bigger wage gap, but the American dream there of authority, the American dream that you can climb up through the social systems is very much part of America, and that's why their power distance is quite lower, because if you're born in a ghetto in America, they say with the American dream you can become a billionaire, where in China that sort of dream isn't quite the same. You are born into your social circles, and that's kind of where you stay, and you've got to respect the authority and the levels of society around you. That's the perspective that I was able to pull from the books. That's the perspective that I was able to sort of garner from reading on the website as well. The next one is individualism. Now, individualism, 93 for America, 20 for China. Big difference there. But individualism, you would say that is probably an American idea. Freedom, rights, the American way. You have the power to be whoever you want to be. You pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you just go and do it. It is the American dream. Being an individual, that is America. And then China is a lot more collective. China is about the family a bit more. It's about being part of that family team, being part of that collective, and doing what's best for the country over maybe doing what's best for yourself. Now, to throw in a little political zinger here, if we think about how both those countries have reacted to a certain pandemic, one, people were very happy to be inside for over a month and not really complain about it. The other one, people could barely be inside for 2 weeks before they were demonstrating and waving flags outside certain governors' houses. So that's where you're going to see the difference in societal sort of reaction to events. One's very collective and are happy to do what their authoritarian governments are telling them. The other one's very individualistic and basically won't listen. The next one is masculine, where this is masculine versus femininity. I'm not going to get too deep into this because at the end of the day, they're both very similar, but there's slight differences in culture here, where the American masculinity is about success. It's about being number one, winning at all costs. The Chinese masculinity is a little bit more about avoiding leisure and pleasure time and family time to becoming successful. Like, you cut off your pleasure to be more successful, where Americans' masculinity is more like you will compete to be better than everybody else around you, but they're still both very similar in their masculine levels. But the cultural differences within that are much different as to how an American masculine society works and how a Chinese masculine society works, even though they score very similar on that chart. The next one is uncertainty avoidance. Now, looking at my screen here, I've got 30 for China and 46 for America. Now, China is lower, and that's maybe down to their language and also their religious background. The reason why I say that is China is dominated, and China's religions are dominated by old Chinese thinking from the Tao Te Ching and Confucius, where they actually have a lot of ambiguous words in their language. They have a lot of ambiguity actually entwined in their religious scriptures and entwined in the way that they talk about the life. So they are used to being in a world of ambiguity, and they're able to take on new ideas and pivot, being a little bit more entrepreneurial because they have that ambiguity written into the fabric of their culture. Now, America, being that you can be an entrepreneur, you can be number one, they are actually also quite good at that. They are able to live in that ambiguity, but also they can be quite hesitant to change. America is quite stuck in tradition, so that's why they're higher up than China in a certain extent. And what I mean by tradition, I mean just we get into religious here, we get into abortion rights, we get into gun rights, we get into other things, you know, the things that maybe somebody from the outside will be like, why are you stuck on that issue? Those laws haven't changed for 400 years. And I'm not going to get into that in my own personal opinions in this video because I don't really see the point of it. But that's where America's ambiguity might be a little higher because they have a tendency to stick to these antiquated laws for a lot longer than maybe some other societies do. And moving on to the next one, which is a long-term orientation. Again, this one here, China's like 87, America's 26. Chinese culture in general is more about long-term. It's more about relationships. It's more about taking care of the relationship and the family over a long period of time. American business and American culture is a little bit more about the short-term. They're Americans in general, they're okay with doing business with people who they don't know, but building those deep relationships is probably something that American society isn't great at. I know that is very similar in Canada and the UK as well, where there can be a lot of surface relationships, but those deeper ones might be harder to bond. Now, I'm not talking about individuals here. If you're an individual hearing that and you're like, oh, I don't agree with that, the point of this, these are averages across the whole span of the 50 odd million people who live in Britain or the 330 million people who live in the United States. These are averages, and obviously as an individual, if you're hearing this and you disagree with that, that's 100% correct. You might be completely different, but also you might have another culture that you might be from a German heritage or a Russian heritage or a French heritage or a Japanese heritage, and that might actually change the way that you interact within your Canadian or American or Chinese environments, but that doesn't change the fact that the majority of people around you will lean into these different scoring areas because, again, they're averages. Averages are great for the herd, but they're not great for the individual. Again, with long-term orientation, America was at 26. I think I touched on that already. The individualism, the have it now, have it yesterday kind of economic world that America lives in, that American dream, that seems to be leaning into that part of their society. Now, the last one we're going to talk about here, I'm just going to look at the screen again. We've got indulgence. Again, America's at 68, China's at 24. This feeds into what I'm already talking about. The indulgent levels in the United States, the winner, the instant gratification, the showing of wealth. The Instagram culture of you're as broke as shit in real life, but on Instagram you're a baller and you're driving your Mercedes, you're throwing money around, but you can't actually afford food or rent. These are averages and cultural norms that we have for these two countries. I live in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, and we do have a little bit of that crazy rich Asian culture in Vancouver. Vancouver's quite a wealthy city. There is a lot of wealthy Chinese people in Vancouver. So this is one part of the graph where socially norms within the whole of China, I can understand that they might be less indulgent. However, the Chinese that I definitely see within the Vancouver area driving R8, Audi R8s, driving Lamborghinis, wearing the most outrageous Versace or Gucci, Louis Vuitton stuff. So while America has more of that sewn into the culture, the Instagram life, the Facebook life, the keeping up with the Joneses, the celebrating your wins and letting the world know how successful you are. That is part of the Western lifestyle in essence, and particularly the American lifestyle, the individualism that we talked about, the short-term orientation of instant gratification, and along with this indulgence of getting that instant, being out there, being indulgent. And what I'm trying to say here is, like, even though you might be able to pick out, well, I don't believe that Chinese people are less indulgent than Americans, and you might have that perspective if you were sitting at certain parts of Vancouver where you're seeing 20-year-olds driving $200,000 sports cars. However, this isn't about those smaller percentage of society. This whole thing that I've talked about, and this is discussing all 6 dimensions, which I've already touched on. These are averages. These are cultural norms. These are like the subconscious norms that we fall into without really knowing. So yes, because someone can afford a $200,000 sports car, it might not mean that they're showing off. Where in another society, somebody might buy that $200,000 sports car, but they might not quite be able to afford it because it's part of their projecting their lifestyle. And I don't know if you can quite get that comparison, but I'm not saying that's true for everything, but I'm just trying to balance out my perspective here. Now, to wrap up this video, again, it's trying to understand this textbook, this huge ass book. There's a lot of research in it. It's quite vast. As individuals, we are very different, but as collective herds, we can fall into cultural norms. Reading these types of textbooks and reading the research and getting deep into it, you actually start to understand that they're not just stereotypes. They are actually subconscious cultural norms that are wired in because of religion, because of the language you speak, where our country is on the world, what kind of climate there was, what kind of people migrated there. There's so many things that can affect who we are as a people and how we interact with each other. That's where I kind of want to wrap up this video, and I want to actually put something up on the screen here. It's the last sentence or paragraph from the book, and I think it's super important because for me, it just doesn't speak to how we get along with different people from different parts of the world within a work environment. If you're a project manager traveling to a different part of the world, or if you're living somewhere like I am in Vancouver, where you've got Mexicans, Americans, Chinese, Saudis, Persians, Japanese, the whole world is in the city. And if you're in London, if you're in New York, you're in Paris, you're going to be in a similar situation. LA, you're going to have many different cultures. So it's good to understand these concepts to be able to work with different people. But I'm going to throw this up now on the screen, and if you read it there, this is the last sentence from the book. Peoples will differ, but they have to learn to coexist without wanting others to become just like them. Any other road is a dead end. The reason why I want to finish with that is I do think that certain superpowers in the world, you could maybe say America, you could maybe argue China, is as they grow as empires or shrink, but as they grow as empires, even the British did this. They expect where they go in the world, they expect people to be more like them, and they force their culture onto other people. I know America's been doing that for 50 plus years now. Great Britain, let's not dive down that hole, but they definitely did that around the world, forcing the British mentality on India, Australia, South Africa, Ireland, even United States at one point. The reason why I wanted to wrap up with this is we've got to a certain point in the world where forcing our cultural agendas and forcing our business ideas, or this is how I run a team in Canada, so I'm working in Mexico now, so I'm going to be able to use those same strategies. You're going to have to understand that's a fallacy. There isn't a one style fits all that works anywhere. You've got to understand people, you've got to build relationships with people, and you've got to learn to coexist with different opinions. In this tumultuous world that we live in, too many people, whatever side of the scale they're on, left, right, up, down, socialist, capitalist, whatever you want to be, there's too many subgroups and there's too many people, and I think cultural divides are getting so deep within society that we're forgetting to actually understand that because of someone's language, because of someone's religion, because of where they come in the world, they might actually have subconscious cultural norms underwritten within them that they don't understand, and we need to actually sit down and understand them, and then we might actually understand why someone would prefer to have an authoritarian leader like Donald Trump, or why someone would like to have a more of a collectivist leader like Angela Merkel, or why somebody wants to be able to live in a capitalist society to make money, or why somebody wants to live in a more social society like Scandinavia, like Sweden, like Denmark. By understanding their cultural norms, we're going to understand the person better, and then be able to understand their perspective better and be able to grow with them and not get caught in this really ridiculous yelling match that a lot of us seem to be caught in online and within society. And that's where I'm going to wrap this video up. If you want to become a little bit more empathetic to other societies and other cultures, I would highly recommend getting this big bad book, because this book has actually helped me understand that there was a lot more to people than just saying, oh, they're from China, so they're a communist, or they're American, so they're a capitalist, or they're from Mexico, so they're a collective society, and it's going to take them longer to do things. Oh, they're from Britain, so they're a bit posh, or whatever the stereotype is. They drink too much, they have bad teeth. I can joke, I can say that I'm from that part of the world. But anyway, I think this book has helped me realize those layers, and I think it's important that we understand those layers moving forward as a collective society. What do you think about the 6 dimensions and the fact that some of our cultural norms are so deeply ingrained in us that we might not actually even understand them ourselves? Let me know in the comments below. We'll get the conversation started. And thanks very much for watching through to this part of the video. I really do appreciate it. If you want to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, share it out on all our networks, I'd really appreciate it. Apparently it helps the algorithm, and that's only a good thing for me. And again, thanks very much. Hope to see you next time. Make it a good one. Cheers.